Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Trouble with being the last speaker is that everybody says what you had written down. Or either some have heard you say it before. What I think maybe I could do is try to pull together some of the things said this morning and then move on from there. Now, I think it is clear that black people around the world are moving together today to solve the dilemma which we face. I agree with Brother Forman that we have certain ideological problems. I think we have a lot of ideological problems because we start from different major premises. Before I get into that, I want to regroup where we are now and where we have to go. Now, there are two types of oppression in the world. There is exploitation and there is colonization. Forman explained that. I want to go into it more deeply. Because I think when one talks about exploitation, the question of race is not present. One just talks about a group of people who are economically taking advantage of another group. But when one talks about colonization, the question of race comes into play. Because in colonization, it is one race that seeks to dominate an entire other race. And that if we begin to understand those concepts, then we will begin to see clearly where our revolutionary ideology must lead us and not into the pitfalls of any other type of ideology. Now, Brother Forman wrote a book called The Wretched of the Earth. And he said, in essence, the third world was the wretched of the earth. But of the third world, the most damned happens to be the black man. Wherever the black man is found, he is on the bottom of the ladder. And there must be reasons for this other than just economic. I would say the reasons happen to be a deep, ingrained racism produced by white Western society. And we must understand that, and if we try to bluff it over, we will indeed fail, where many other black communists and black socialists have failed, because they fail to deal with the realities of racism. It is indeed a fact that not one Western power today achieved its power without raping Africa. You name it, and I'll claim it. Not one. Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, England, the United States. Canada, an extension of the United States. Except for the French Canadians. But they're still part of white Western. And they did rape West Africa, because my friends in Guinea speak fluent French. Now, I want then to begin for us to deal clearly with the question of colonization. Wherever the black man is, he is colonized. Now, what then in concrete terms is the difference between exploitation and colonization? There are, in fact, poor white people in the United States. They are exploited. That is to say, they're economically deprived of some wealth in the United States. But those white people have their culture, their history, their language, and their value system. These things have not been stripped from them. But that is not true of black people living in the United States. We have been stripped of our culture, our language, our history, our value system, our way of life. We are, in fact, what Forman calls dehumanized. We are dehumanized. And that is the effect of the process of colonization. It seeks to dehumanize its victims. Exploitation does not. Exploitation does not. So we are fighting for our humanity. Fanon says that very clearly in the end of the wretched of the earth. It is our humanity that we're fighting for. White people are just fighting for more money. Poor white people. Poor white people. And we have to understand precisely what that means, what the fight of humanity is all about. Because it means then that we will proceed differently. Number one, it is necessary for Africans, and I make no distinction between Africans living on the continent or Africans living abroad. There is a necessity for Africans to begin to understand the culture which has been plundered purposely and maliciously by white Western society. And it is a necessity for us to pick up that culture and begin to use it as a unifying tool, because a culture is a cohesive force for a people. It is a cohesive force for a people. And that culture has been taken from us because we were never meant to be a united people, because in the unity there will alone begin to amass a way for us to make an assault against our aggressors. Our aggressors. I can't, they turned off the mic. Now, I want to keep hammering on that point because I think too many times people, especially Africans, just overgloss it as if it doesn't mean anything, as if racism was just nothing there. But there must be something to it. We must question. Why us? Why did they go to Africa and just scatter us all over the earth? They had the Indians. Why us? Why the black man? Why is it that they saw fit to split us up, put us in Trinidad, in Jamaica, in St. Thomas, in Brazil, in Cuba, in Panama, in Santo Domingo, in Guatemala, in the United States, even in Canada? Why us? Why us? And to simply say that it's for economic reasons is to delude oneself. It is to delude oneself. Because they could just as easily found white slaves. They could just as easily got red slaves. They had Indian slaves. I'm talking from East India. They had Chinese. Why the black man? And unless we begin to deal consciously with that ingrained racism, our ideology will come to naught. Must understand. Must understand. Now then, in understanding the effects of colonization, we must ask ourselves, what is it that they do that dehumanizes us? The main effect that I've found of colonization is that it makes the victim hate himself. Hate himself. Hate himself. And by allowing the victim to hate himself, he seeks to identify with the master, who he assumes has the values that he himself hates, because he hates the values that he produces. And that is precisely what white Western society has done wherever it has gone. It has destroyed and created hatred among its victims of each other and of themselves. Therefore, they never want to unite with each other because they hate each other and themselves. And they seek to unite with the master whom they love and adore. Whom they love and adore. And we must begin to speak to that. Now then, so colonized people, when we begin to move for a real struggle of liberation, moves on two phases. I call them, for lack of better words, an entertainment and an educational. I think Brother Harry spoke of the entertainment. The entertainment is a necessity. That is where you call the oppressor names. You have to call them names because prior to that stage, you can't even speak out loud against the oppressor. set a stake point in case Africans living in the United States. Until a couple of years ago, they were afraid to say what they really felt about white people out loud. They had to whisper it to each other. So there becomes a state where they begin to, as they define themselves, speak out against the oppressor. It's sort of a warming up session for a fight. You know, like you say, I can take them, I can whoop them many times. And it's a feel-good session. It's a necessity. It is, as Cortland Cox says, insufficient. We need something else to go with it. But we must recognize the necessity of the stages of our struggle. We cannot let white people interpret it for us because they will always degrade it. And if we accept that degradation of ourselves, we're back in the colonial state. Back in the colonial state. Now, once a people who are colonized begin to move against entertaining themselves, then comes the point of education, the point where they begin to speak concretely to the things that must be done. Now, in the United States particularly, Africans have begun to reach that level. That is the most dangerous level for the oppressor, the most dangerous level. And that is why there is so much friction among the movements inside the United States, which are again caused by the oppressor. Fanon says that. Fanon says very clearly that when, I can't remember what page it is, and I don't think I got the quote correctly, but he says when, can you get it for me, Brother Walter? He says when the colonized begins to move, the oppressor tries a number of tricks. Number one is the good trick. They try to be nice, kind to you. They let you poverty programs, grants. They try to pacify you. Once the process of pacification is not working, then they begin to send agent provocateurs inside your movement to stir up and cause fraction within the different branches of your liberation movement. Liberation movement. When finally that stage itself does not work, they come in, as they always come in, with the armed forces. All right? Then we say the United States particularly moves in three ways. We call it the 3 M's. Missionaries, the money, and the Marines. Now then, let us go back to the hatred, because I don't think we can really dig deep into that enough, because to cleanse ourselves of this self-hatred is a process which Fanon recognized and says that sometimes that cleansing period comes out in violence against the oppressor. Against the oppressor. Now we must begin to direct and channel that violence so that it is against a decisive blow against the oppressor. I don't think today, I do not, CIA. Now, if we're going to begin to counteract the hatred that we have had for ourselves and for each other, and it's clearly manifested in black people, I mean the running away from the identity of ourselves, the trying to seek to identify with the oppressor, with his symbols of beauty, his symbols of success, etc., etc. We today have come to grasp with most of those things. But in order to really counteract it, we must develop, since we live in a dialectical world where opposites prevail, we must begin to develop an undying love for ourselves to counteract the hatred that we have for ourselves. And in developing that undying love, which is not, in fact, contradictory to revolution, because it's the same type of love that Che Guevara speaks about, the love the revolutionary has, but for the colonized, it must be concrete. It must be the love of ourselves that we have to get, and the love of our people, especially for the African, because geographically we have been scattered all over the world, all over the world. And why we can look to Africa as the mother continent, we have many of our people abroad who do not have any geographical area, so that the nationalism, which is usually based in land, is going to be lacking for a certain number of time. While that is lacking, we must give our people at least a type of ideology that they can hold on to. Got to give it to them. Got to give it to them. And that philosophy must be based in the concept of the African wherever he is scattered around the world. What is the history of the African? In Brazil, 50% of the population is African. All over the north of South America, the northern section of it, Africans. We don't even know where we are. We have never asked to be sent there. In each of these countries, we do not own, control anything. In each of these countries, we're at the bottom. In each of these countries, at this time, we're not strong enough to seize power. And in each of these countries at this time, it is the white people who keep running and deciding while we are left on the bottom as puppets. In each of these countries. In each of these countries. Got to understand the roots of racism. Got to understand that. Got to understand that. Then we have to state clearly what our fight is. Our fight is against racism and capitalism. And certainly imperialism, which is the highest stage of capitalism. Highest stage. I do not think any of us sitting on this platform are deluded by the black power pimps in the United States. If they were not there, we would not be doing a good job. The fact that they have to try and co-opt black power means that we are doing our job. Means that we're doing. And if we follow correctly, it means that we're heading for the right struggle, because that is precisely what they're supposed to do, try and co-opt it. Then when co-option fails, then the real confrontation will begin to take place. And we have to know that in our minds if we say we're revolutionary. Now then, if we fight against racism and capitalism, imperialism, our question is, what is our goal? Clearly, our goal would be a society free of racism and a society free of capitalism or imperialism. When talking about capitalism, there are three dominating economic systems in the world: capitalism, socialism, or communism. It means that if one is anti-communism, anti-capitalism, and if one is going to seek within the conventional framework to redress one's problems, one must look to socialism and to communism. But just to say socialism or communism today is not enough, because there are many types of socialism and communism in the world today. Tito calls himself a communist. Mao Zedong calls himself a communist. Fidel Castro calls himself a communist. And the Russians say that they are communists. So just to throw those words loosely around just won't make it. I certainly don't think that one could go along with the Russian form of communism and also go along with the Chinese form of communism, because they're clearly different. They're clearly different ideological areas where people must take sides. And what is happening is that the African who doesn't have a land to talk about is caught up in an ideological fight between whether we should be Mao Zedong guys or whether we should be Russianites, and we don't even have a country to call our own. Not a country to call our own. So that the first thing we must seek is to begin to talk about ourselves and how we get that ideology together, move to seize some land, build a base, and begin to liberate our people and, of course, the motherland. Okay. We ought to understand, though, in dealing with communism, especially Russian communism, that we have to gather from the history of our people. Now, there was a black man from Trinidad by the name of George Padmore. He served on the Comintern under Stalin, and he left because he said the Russians were racist, essentially. On the question of colonialism in Africa, the Russians compromised. Clearly. Any African student who's been to Russia will tell you clearly that the Russians are racist. Period. Period. And we must begin to understand. We must, because there are too many tricks being played on us today, because the black man is going to be pivotal in the coming years. We know it, and they know it. A goal of society free of racism and free of imperialism. The question is, can we achieve a society free of racism where both races can live together? That is the question that we must really address ourselves to. And not just quote words and say niceties about all human beings, because that's Western. They have said that, and as Fanon says, they have proved themselves incapable of bringing it about. Their own things. So that the questions that we must now be asking is whether or not you can. Brother Harry says that it's clear that inside a society you cannot have two political and economic systems. Can it also be true that you can have inside a society two races which can in fact coexist without one dominating the other? And I'm just not talking about physical domination, I'm also talking about cultural domination. I'm talking about cultural domination. Okay. We have then to begin to define some terms which are being thrown around very loosely, such as revolutions, black revolutionaries, militants, black militants, armed struggle, et cetera, et cetera. I think we ought to understand what a revolutionary is, when a revolution is, and how it comes about. A revolution is the total destruction of the old system, total destruction, the reemplacement of a new system which speaks for the masses of the people of a given country. That's only when you have revolution. You have the changing of hands of governments. You have coup d'etat. You don't have revolutions. In order to have a revolution, I think that Forman went into this quite lengthy, so I could just brush over it, but keep reminding us that you don't have a revolution until you have taken power. A revolution does not begin until you take power. To talk about revolution before you take power is to be, at best, politically naive, at worst, stupid. For example, Fidel Castro fought in the Sierra Maestra for several years. But while he was fighting, the Cuban Revolution was not going on. The Cuban Revolution did not start until Fidel walked into Havana with guns in his hands, Che on his side, and say, "This day, I claim this country for the masses of Cuban people." Then the revolution began. Then the revolution began. Now, the period that precedes a revolution is called armed struggle. So that what Fidel was waging before he walked into Havana was armed struggle, not revolution. Armed struggle. Armed struggle, because you can't have revolution until you have the power. You can't give people jobs if you don't control. You can't distribute the wealth unless you got the wealth. So you can't talk about revolution until you have seized power. Seized power. Now, for me, it is clear. There's only three ways you get things. You ask, you beg, or you take. You work for it, you beg for it, or you take it. No, you don't steal it, you take it. You only steal it when you don't have power. If you have power, you take. I don't think that white Canadians would say that they stole Canada from the Indians. They said they took it, and they did. Well, then it's clear that we can't work for these lands. We can't beg for them, so we must take them. Then it's clear that we must take them through revolutionary violence. Now, violence is neither good nor bad. There is no moral judgment to violence. Violence is only he who has the power to legitimatize. Yes. Oh, yes. In the United States, if I were in the United States Army, I would be in Vietnam. If I killed 30 yellow people with slanted eyes, I would get medals. Yes. In the United States of America, if I shot 2 white cops in Harlem, I would get the electric chair. So murder is neither right nor wrong. It is he who has the power to legitimatize it. And that the major dilemma that Africans face is that we have never legitimatized. White Western society has legitimatized everything for us. We have never been able to legitimatize. They legitimize religion. They legitimize wars. They legitimize education. They legitimize beauty. They legitimize everything. We must now seek to legitimatize for ourselves. We must say to people in the United States, it is more honorable to kill hunky cops than to kill Vietnamese. They have done nothing to us. We have to seek to legitimatize because they will not let us legitimatize. If I were in power and you were arming against me, I wouldn't let you arm against me. Destroy you. Have to if I'm going to stay in power. And we have to recognize that. That's our struggle. The struggle is that much harder. The victory is going to be that much sweeter. Now then, what do we mean by revolutionary violence? I think we ought to understand because the line is very thin. It's a line that the late Dr. King used to play with. He said, I'm against self-defense because in the self-defense, the line of aggressive violence and defensive violence is very thin. He's correct. It is very thin. But we must understand that self-defense never changes the status quo. It maintains the status quo. It just keeps the victims alive. Let me give you an example. If every black man in the United States was armed today, and they sat in the boundaries of the communities we're confined to, and every time a white cop came after us, we shot him, the system of the United States would never change. It would remain the same. We would live longer. They would just isolate us. Huh? So self-defense never changes the situation. Che Guevara said that. It maintains the status quo. Aggressive violence is what is needed to change the status quo. Clearly. 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 But that is because Africans get caught up in the questions of violence. We think that violence is just shooting or murder. We do not see that poverty is violence. We do not see that rape is violence. We do not see that cultural degradation is violence. We have allowed white society to define violence as only the man with the gun. How stupid. It is violent for white society to rape Africa of copper, gold, aluminum, copper, silk, milk, everything. It is violent. 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 It is violent to have little black children get up and feel that they are ugly. It is violent. Yeah. It is violent. It is violent. define violence, and we define how we meet that violence. We meet violence with violence. It's just a degree. That's all it is. And once we begin to define it, then we legitimatize the right to move. We should not think that violence is just a gun or death. Matter of fact, I would much rather die at 26 than live to 76 and die of malnutrition and see my children hungry, starving, my daughters prostitutes, and my wife sitting in a corner and my children with big stomachs. I would rather die at 26. So then what the African has to do is to, for himself, define and no longer allow white society to define. We must define. We must define. We must define. I'll give you the $2 I promised you. Now, I want to say one thing about the period in which black revolutionary movements around the world find themselves. Or maybe I think I should talk about black militants versus black revolutionaries first. Now, in the United States, there are a lot of black militants. There are few black revolutionaries because we said revolutionaries for total overthrow of the old order. A black militant is someone in the United States who is an angry black man. But he is angry that he individually is kept out of the system. A black revolutionary is someone who wants to overthrow, destroy. A black militant is someone who yells and about the degradation of black men, and as soon as he gets a $20,000 a year poverty job, jumps up and yells, "Cool it, brothers, everything gonna be all right." And we have to make clear that distinction. A lot of black militants. He's a black militant. Militant is that he's moving hard against the system because he wants to be part of it. He has been kept out of it. He wants to be in it. A black revolutionary does not want to be any part of it. He wants to completely destroy it. Now then, if there are black revolutionaries in the United States, it's clear that we cannot just look inside the United States, but we must begin to look internationally. To talk about black power in the United States is absurd and self-defeating. We must talk about black power in the world. In the world. In the world. The Congress invited Rap Brown, Leroy Jones, Eldridge Cleaver, and several other people. They cannot leave the United States because the one thing the United States does not want is the black man making international ties. That's what took for me, and I didn't do anything but go where I wanted to go, and they told me I was free to go. So went to China, Vietnam, Cuba, see the world. Why not? I'm an American. Took my passport. They take those passports because the most vulnerable spot of capitalism today, because it is no longer domestic capitalism, but world imperialism, is the struggle on the international level. Must be. And that's why we cannot seek to just talk about local problems as an entity unto themselves. We must begin to internationalize our thinking. Therefore, it is our responsibility to know about the struggles in the world, not only of black people, but of other oppressed people, and to know which side we're on, who we must begin to support at this point morally, to a point where we can then move materially. Must begin to do. Must begin to do. Now then, because the United States is aware of this, what they're going to do is to create more fractions inside the black movement. You will have divisions. For example, in one country in Africa, you have 5 guerrilla groups. Yes. Each of them have the message. Each of them have the correct ideology, and each of them are going to lead the masses to revolution. Each of them with their cadres of 25 each. They're going to lead the revolution. And that there is more friction added to this. Now, it seems to me it is the role of anyone who calls himself a revolutionary, rather than emphasize, de-emphasize the divisions within his own group. We must present a united front. Must present a united front. Because to emphasize those conditions only lead to our people who still hate themselves an excuse to wipe out each other. Because our people are still colonized in the mind. All of us. All of us. The first thing we do when we become revolutionary is want to attack another black man. Right. Right. It is true that the Vietnamese kill South Vietnamese, but they do not seek to kill South Vietnamese. They run from fights with the South Vietnamese, and only when they have to fight the South Vietnamese do they fight the South Vietnamese. They know who their major enemy is. Their major enemy is the United States of America, the aggressors. The aggressors. They understand that in their minds very clearly, and that is very revolutionary. When Mao Zedong broke from the Kuomintang in 1929, he didn't go around fighting Chiang Kai-shek. They kept running from the Chinese, pleading with the Chinese, saying, we're brothers, we're the same people, let's not fight each other, let's unite, let's take care of the Japanese invaders. They were always consciously attacking the major enemy. The major enemy is never your own people who have developed and come out of the same environment that you come out of. It is the man who has worked and controlled those environments that produces your people to turn against you. Certainly, the people in South Vietnam, Key and Thu and all, every day there's another one, are just puppets. If you shoot them, the man's going to get another puppet. But if you shoot the man controlling the puppets, then they're going to do like you want them to do. Do like you want them to do. Our major enemy first. Because also, speaking revolutionary, you cannot wage 2 fights at the same time, especially if you're trying to organize and develop an army. Can't do it. You have to wage only one front. Fidel Castro told the Cuban bourgeoisie, let's get rid of Batista, brothers. And then when he got rid of Batista, he said, Dick, this is a Leninist Marxist state. Pick your sides. Either you're with me or get against the wall. Yes. He did not fight the bourgeoisie while he was fighting Batista and the American lackeys. It's impossible to do that. He had to first get rid of the external threat and then begin to talk about the internal threat. You can't talk about an internal threat when you have nothing to talk about. You certainly are cautious, but you don't begin to make an onslaught against your own people. That's just what the enemy wants you to do. When you hear the tallies of the South Vietnamese in the Vietnam War, you never hear 500 South Vietnamese killed. You hear 500 Americans killed this week. You very rarely see South Vietnamese because the Vietnamese consciously try to get to their people and to correct them. And say to them, you have no business fighting with the Americans. They try to convert them. They try to get people working inside the lines with America. And unless they have to defend themselves, that's the only time they fight South Vietnamese. And we have to understand that principle. Now we have to ask ourselves, how then do Africans move against white Western society? Because we cannot see it as an isolated fight, black people against in the United States against white America, or black Trinidadians against whoever controls them, or they were intellectuals, they went to Oxford. why we have to redefine education. Yeah, we're going to get them, no doubt about it. We have to understand that in Guinea-Bissau, in Angola, in Mozambique, it's not just going to be black people against the Portuguese. The Portuguese are supported by the United States of America. Yes. When Portugal bombs Guinea-Bissau, Portugal doesn't manufacture any planes. It's an American plane bombing for Guinea-Bissau. But what the Americans say is that we don't give them planes to bomb Africa. They are part of NATO, and we have to give them planes for NATO. If South Africa were to revolt today, do you believe that the United States of America would sit idly by and let the blacks take that country? You are absolutely deluding yourself. It is going to be an international fight. Do you think that Nkrumah was dethroned merely by some simple black man named Ankara? No, he was dethroned by the forces of Britain, the United States, and France. What of the fight in Nigeria today? Do you think the fight in Nigeria is really a black man's fight? Or is it white people who are waiting to gain the oil in Biafra because the Arabs have closed their oil ports? What do you think the fight is? We have to understand in the world precisely what is going on, because the African is going to play a key role in World War III. And it's right around the corner. Right. Now then, when you move as a colonized people, you move culturally, you move politically, you move economically, and you move militarily. Now, obviously, the United States of America is not going to allow black people to move politically in any way that's going to endanger their political system. Clearly, they're not going to allow black people to move economically in any way that's going to, at least if they see it, going to endanger their economic system. They're not going to let black people move in any way, culturally or military, that's going to allow black people to endanger their system. Any way they see it, they will break it up in any means. And finally, of course, there's always force. And with force, at this time, they can win. So that we must begin to instill in our minds something that will balance out the question of force. Now, Mao Zedong said, and the Vietnamese proved, that technological power does not win a war. It is the will of the people to fight that wins a war. It is always the will of the people to fight that decides which war is won. The United States should be able to defeat Vietnam. They cannot, because Ho Chi Minh has instilled in the people of Vietnam a faith that no matter what, they die. The only way America can have Vietnam is when the last Vietnamese is wiped out. If he is 6 months or 106 years. Only way. Only way. We have to begin then to do that to our people. That then is the job of writers. They must instill in our people a will to fight to the death. It is a question of either we win or we die. Nothing else. Nothing else. We win or we die. Either we control the resources of our mother continent, or no one controls the resources of our mother continent. Either we control the destinies of our lives, or nobody controls any lives where we live. No lives where we live. The paradoxes must be clear, and the contradictions must be heightened. Because in heightening contradictions, you prepare the ground for revolutionary warfare. We must heighten the contradictions. It is the job, then, of the black writer to work to heighten the contradictions. Let us not waste our time mishmashing. Let's polarize the forces. Let's polarize them so that the contradictions are clear, so that there is a choice. Either you fight with us or you fight with them. There is no middle ground. We must heighten the contradictions. We must consciously work to heighten the contradictions. That is the job of the artist. Must be his job. Because he at this time is allowed to move where other people are not. And he must seek now to break the ground and to prepare the movement for the political, economic, because the military will continue to go on, but not in the onslaught that is needed at this time. He must begin. The black writer must begin to redefine for the African who our heroes are. We no longer need white cowboys. We need Kwame Nkrumahs, Sekou Touré's, Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Leroy Jones, Rap Brown. It is the job then of the black writer to do this. The job of the black writer to do this. Black writer must begin to redefine it, and not in a concept of Western society, but in an African concept, which means it is not wholly intellectual, but rather quite emotional. Because Africans are an emotional people. I know we've been taught to be ashamed of it, because white society say, you just can't do something, you got to sit. But the period of analyzation has always been used by white society to delude and forestall our movements. Always have been used. All we have to do is look at Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. They allowed him to play back and forth with their intellectual nonsense and forestall our movement. Yes. And if we continue to play intellectual games with them, we do a disservice to the masses of our people. We are not responsible to answering Western society. We're responsible only to fulfilling the needs of the masses of Africans in the world today. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else. Clearly, that is the job of the black writer. And if he wants to do that, he must just ignore. Do not even waste time answering or contradicting. They are not worth our time. In most of the places, only the black writer who's been to a white college know of them. Shakespeare. What's that Canterbury Tale? Come on, Ted Jones. We don't have to waste our time even contradicting the arguments that they give, because that means we are on the defensive. We have always to be on the offensive, because we are fighting a just. We have always to be on the offensive, because we are fighting a just struggle. They have to be on the defensive. If we allow them to put us on the defensive, we never wage a war. We are just caught up defending them. For example, a black man gets up and white people say, "You're a racist." And he spends 25 minutes explaining that he is not a racist to white people. To white people. Later, you can call them racist. They tell you, "Yeah, I'm a racist. If you get smart, I'm going to kill you." And there ain't nothing you can do about it. Because they do not waste their time arguing. Black man says that black people must arm themselves, and white people says that's violence. You have to be nonviolent. And a black man is going to argue for years and years on the need for violence. When they came to get slaves from Africa, they didn't come nonviolently. Talking about. When they took South America, when they took the United States, when they took Canada, they didn't take it non-violently. They took it with a pioneering spirit. And it is with a pioneering spirit that we must move forward. Then that becomes the main task and the main responsibility of the black writer, because too many black writers are involved in contradicting and proving white society incorrect. The fact that you pay attention to them means that you give their arguments validity. Assume your major presumption is that they are invalid. Let us create our own and move on. Move on. Move on. Forman said that it is the job of the black writer to become involved. Certainly, he is not a writer first. He is black first. Black first. The writings that he produces are the writings from an environment which he is from because he is black, not because he has writer skills, because he is black. Because he is black. Yes, that's his first task. Not to talk about the literary skills of writing and blah, blah. Who decides the literary skills of writing? Shakespeare. Now then, before I conclude, I want to touch then on the subject where we must move, and that's the international arena. And this becomes the most important task of the writer, because he can begin to create heroes, little poems, little rhymes, little short stories. For example, he could write a book called Our Comrade in Arms, the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese. And we could just pass it around, because the Vietnamese are our comrades in arms. Then let the white writers try to tell us why they are not our comrade in arms. He could write our friends, the Arabs, because we must understand the conflict in the Middle East if we are to be international. And we must understand why it is imperative that black people side with the Arabs, because there is a just war. Just war. But most of the black writers get caught up in defending the so-called state of Israel and justifying the fact that 6 million Jews got killed, therefore they should have Israel. What nonsense is that? All of us are sorry that 6 million Jews got killed, but that doesn't mean therefore Israel, therefore East Germany. Therefore East Germany. The Arabs did not kill the Jews. Hitler killed the Jews. You want, take it from Hitler. Take it from the Germans. Take it from the Germans. The black writer today is caught in a pivot where he's afraid to open his mouth, because as soon as he says Arabs, they say anti-Semitic, and he crawls back into a shell. They're anti-black, later form. Let's move on. We must understand the implications of the Middle East war, and we must understand why the Arabs, emotionally, Egypt is in Africa. It has been in Africa for over 4,000 years. If we say we come from Africa, then we fight for Africa. Can we let people who just developed a state in 1948 cling to that any more than we cling to over 4,000 years of history? We must be fair. We must be precise. And we can never be afraid of not moving. We may be afraid, but we can never let fear immobilize us. Got to move on. Got to move on. Got to move on. We have to understand the implications of Cuba. And we have to say, yeah, the Cubans are doing it, and we with them. Go on, Fidel, work with it. Work with it. Work with it. And we have to prepare ourselves for the Sino-Soviet dispute, which is going to grow, and understand whose side we're on and why we're on their side. Check Mao Zedong out. Check him out. Check him out. We have to understand the implications of the Organization of American States in South America and the hold that it has on our territories in the Caribbean. We must understand that. Have to understand that. Have to understand that. We have to understand the French interventionist forces that Forman talked about. So de Gaulle can preach his junk, but he moves in with force anytime somebody threatens one of his territories, which is in our motherland. Got to understand that. Got to understand that. There is little time for us to do anything but to consciously think, read, communicate, prepare, and get guns. And get guns. And get guns. Get them. Get all the guns you can get. We believe in equality. Yeah. White people got guns, black people should have guns. Yeah. Don't get caught up with that proliferation, nuclear banter. That's junk. Russia, the United States, France, England, they got, and Israel got the atomic bomb. And now they're going to say to everybody, don't develop it. Y'all don't need it. We got it. Got an atomic bomb? Every country needs an atomic bomb. If they got a hydrogen, cobalt, whatever bomb they have, every country has to have it, because we must understand equality is not this political nonsense about one man, one vote. It is economic and militarily equality that counts in the world today. Three forces of equality. Must be political, it must be economical, it must be militarily. When you have those three, then you have real equality. Can't have one without the other. Can't have the vote and no gun if the white man got the gun. Can't have the vote and no money if the white man got the money. I can have the vote, he can have the vote. I can have the gun, he can have the gun. I can have the money, he can have the money. Then when he gets smart, we can go to it. Yeah. But if I don't have anything and he has everything, I have to take from him what he gives to me. We've got to get guns. Got to get guns. Because if you talk about revolutionary, you cannot be revolutionary until you pick up the gun and you are willing to kill for your people. Notice I didn't say die. Anybody can do that. Yeah. I am serious. It is much easier to die for one's people than it is to kill for one's people. Dr. Martin Luther King is a living testament to that. Yes, it is much easier to die for one's people than to kill for one's people, especially if you are the oppressed. Now, once one picks up the gun, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're revolutionary. Then you need to develop that political direction that we have been discussing. But that political direction develops as we move. Fanon is correct. There is lacking an ideology for the Africans. But the Chinese didn't have their ideology in a blueprint of revolution. They struggled, they fought, the contradictions arose, they resolved. If they didn't resolve the contradictions resolved them. It was not until they conquered that they began to develop a real revolutionary ideology. Same is true. I'll move it up to 3. The same then is true of Cuba, and the same must be true for us. We must work, struggle, develop that ideology, but we must be conscious of what we're against. Racism, capitalism, and imperialism. That is our fight. Thank you.
I have a few bureaucratic functions to perform. The first is to ask people if they can just hold tight until we're quite through, until the speakers have a chance to leave the platform. Apart from that, it is important to notice that the white press attempted to play up certain family differences which black people had at this conference, which are necessary and which do not break up the family in any way. And one positive thing which those of us who have come here to participate would like to do is to express our appreciation to the Congress organizers, to the West Indian Student Society, for having undertaken what is a major operation, and hope that this in itself will be a form of development within the Montreal and Canadian community as far as the blacks are concerned, and indeed the whites. And as I said, this is our testimonial, as it were, our own solidarity with those black brothers who went to the trouble of preparing this conference. There is very little else to say. Initially, if those of you who might not have heard, the conference, of course, is over because we've had everything we should have had this afternoon. But for those delegates and other participants who are still around at 2:30, those delegations will meet again in another family discussion from, I think, 2:30. We'd better meet. 3 o'clock is the time that is announced. I think we'll meet here. And I don't think that anybody need misunderstand when we say family discussion.
One.
Well, we'll have a standing ovation while the brothers